Okay, so the agenda for today's fifth webinar is Land and Water Strategies for Biodiversity Conservation and Sustainable Agriculture. To this end, we will provide a quick overview of EU-funded project RefreSCAR, followed by an introduction to our experts. Our experts will be sharing their presentations and insights. Today we are featuring Bernhard Schmid, Professor of Environmental Sciences at the University of Zurich and Adjunct Professor at the Institute of Ecology at the University of Beijing, along with Casper Zulim de Swarte, Senior Manager at the Policy, Agriculture and Food for One Planet Business for Biodiversity and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. After these presentations, we will have a Q&A session and closing remarks, so please feel free to join the session and pose any questions that you may have to our presenters. Our RefreSCAR project is a coordination and support action spanning from 1st of September 2023 until the 31st of August of 2027. And our overall aim is to facilitate improved coordination for national and European bioeconomy research programs in the European research area through strengthened SCAR working groups, with the specific objectives, firstly, to provide scientific and administrative support to the work of the SCAR working groups, to enhance their capacity to formulate research policy advice and collaborate on matters of common interest. Secondly, to enhance inclusiveness within SCAR working groups and support the active engagement of their members. Furthermore, the goal is to connect actors across research and innovation, policy and practice, with the aim of enabling SCAR to become a key bridging initiative across these domains. Also to help SCAR working groups to reach a broader audience of stakeholders and strengthen linkages with key EU and international initiatives. And last but not the least, to support the development of a strong SCAR foresight process, including the effective dissemination of its outcomes. So the overall goal is to strengthen SCAR within the European research area. To this end, 6 pillars of support have been designed, which is admin support, scientific support, communication, SCAR engage action plans to onboard new members within the underrepresented countries, followed by SCAR foresight, and the main one, which is overarching pillar for our activities today, is SCAR Connect, which is to connect research, innovation, policy and practice, and to organize a series of policy and practice events, such as hackathon that we are also organizing, and today's Spotlight on webinar. The consortium members are a wide network of research institutes, ministries, experts in different domains with over 100 years of experience in SCAR. We also boast the expertise in innovation support, project management, communication, and capacity building. For more information, visit SCAR Europe, where you can also inform on the ongoing activities of the SCAR and SCAR working groups, but you can also find more about RefreSCAR at the website and all the activities that we are currently working on. So without the further ado, I would like to give a quick introduction to our presenters today. I will just briefly exit the full screen mode because I would like to give the introduction to our speakers. So Bernhard Schmid studied biology at the University of Zurich, where he received his doctoral degree. After postdoctoral stays in North Wales at Harvard University, he was professor of conservation biology at the University of Basel before becoming professor of environmental sciences and founding director of the corresponding institute at the University of Zurich. Since 2018, he is part-time at the University of Zurich's Department of Geography and at Beijing University's Institute of Ecology. His main research interests are experimental plant ecology and biodiversity ecosystem functioning relationships. Topics include plant decision-making, plant growth and competition, invasion biology, ecology and genetics of small populations, life history evolution of clonal organisms, genotype versus environment interactions, evolutionary plant genetics and epigenetics, mechanisms of plant competition and coexistence, plant-animal interactions, community assembly, community genetics and evolution, ecological intensification of agriculture, and sustainable forestry. And our second speaker today is Casper Zulim de Swarte, who is a senior manager policy, agriculture and food for One Planet by the Business for Biodiversity and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. One Planet Business for Biodiversity is an international cross-sectoral action-oriented business coalition on biodiversity with a specific focus on agriculture. They work to support the transformation of agriculture to be profitable for farming communities while regenerating natural capital rather than depleting it, by triggering transformation in strategic landscape, serving as blueprints to be replicated around the world. Europe has been chosen as the first region of focus. Their ambition in Europe is to contribute to transforming 40 million hectares to regenerative practices by 2030. They do this through regional leadership, innovation, and radical collaboration. Casper has accumulated 25 years of experience in food system transition at European scale, working on regenerative, nutritious, and equitable food systems. He has worked both the government as well as private sector, specializing in facilitating collaboration between companies, governments, and scientific communities. Amongst many other committees, Casper served as the Netherlands delegate in the Program Committee for Horizon and SCAR Food Systems Working Groups. I want to thank speakers for taking the time to join us today. And now I would like to give floor to Bernhard to initiate his presentation. Bernhard, welcome aboard and let us know if you experience any issues in technical terms.
Bernhard, you're muted.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
We can hear you and we see the presentation.
I just wanted to thank Marina for the nice introduction and you all for listening to my brief presentation. This will be from a scientist, but I think the recent development in the field are really applicable, and I hope our next speaker will maybe go more into the application. So intensification of agriculture is ecologically possible if we use biodiversity as a management tool. And with that, I mean biodiversity at all levels, as you will see in my slides. So I have to see if I can advance this. Sorry, it's sometimes not so easy. Yeah. Okay, so first, looking back at the intense agriculture that we use still nowadays, it was kind of introduced by Justus Liebig in Germany, who thought it's all chemistry. You know, there might be a single plant that is really so good that if you give it the right environment, it will have very high yield. That led to a high uniformity of crops. And in the meantime, we see it has a lot of negative environmental effects, like eutrophication, pesticides, and so on. But in addition, we find that the green revolution has come or is coming to a halt. We can no longer increase the productivity of some of our most important crop species. At the same time, the ecologists have developed this new field of research, which is called biodiversity, ecosystem functioning research. And they initially started this because they thought maybe diverse ecosystems are actually not at all better, more productive or more stable. And there were even some theories that said simple systems could be more stable. So in the past 30 years, a lot of ecologists did experiments where they deliberately planted plots with many or few species, and they always found that the more species you have in the system, the better the system functions. That means it's more productive, it prevents soil degradation, it prevents diseases, and it increases to more stability over time and also in the face of extreme events or global change. So it was hard at the beginning to understand why this would be so. But the reason is that the single species can never do everything. So it's like in human societies, if you have a division of labor, then maybe one species is best to capture the light at the top of the canopy of a stand, and others are better to take the remaining light at the bottom of a stand. Or in addition to this division of labor, we can also have facilitation, that two species support each other, or that they are, for example, connected to microbes like mycorrhizal fungi that help them to exchange substances. And then, of course, also pollination is a good example of facilitation that you have in a biodiverse system. So let's first look at the level of the single crop, where now we often just plant a single genotype, a single variety. In Switzerland, the mills, they even wanted the farmers to produce only one genotype per wheat field. It's really stupid, and in the meantime, we know mixtures have sometimes better baking quality, make tastier bread, and so on. And so in the meantime, there have been so many trials that this huge meta-analysis, that's the number of trials in parentheses, they all showed on average an increase of maybe 2 to 4% in yield. But if you take rice, in addition, it's even going up to more than 15%. Now, this is all achieved with varieties that have been maximized to produce a lot in monoculture, monocropping systems. If they will be further developed to be good in mixtures, then these mixture overyields will be even greater. So that will be the next green revolution that will increase further the productivity of our most important crops. But then if we go to the next level up, it is in the meantime also clear that if you mix, for example, cereals and legumes, like lentil and wheat or other things, you generally can get the same amount on less land than if you would crop the different species separately. On average, in this early review, it was 23% space saved if you would use mixed cropping. That means if you use mixed cropping on the original area, you get the higher productivity. So, and then, like I said before, that's just working with the varieties of species we have now. But when you look at it over time, you see this meta-analysis, which also summarizes many such experiments. The grain yield of the sum, let's say lentils and maize combined, increases over time, and the difference to the monoculture gets even higher. Now, these authors said it's because the mixtures, they improve the soil fertility. They don't reduce it. But another interesting idea is that perhaps over time, you get the selection of genotypes within species that are better for different species to do this division of labor efficiently. And once we did this in a little experiment here, we took seeds from a biodiversity experiment that had been running for 8 years and created new communities with these seeds that have been used to grow together. And when we compared this with plants that were bought from the supplier, those were for monocultures, then we see that using the selected genotypes, we get the higher productivity. So if we add breeding to what we can immediately get by just combining species, we will get even higher benefits of the ecological intensification at the level of crop species mixtures. And the reason for this is, in this example on the upper right, we had experiment about how to deal with GMOs. And the reason was a bit a different one, because Switzerland, they were very much against this. And we had by chance one GMO that was resistant against mildew strain A and the other against mildew strain B. And when we planted them together, the mildew infection was reduced by 65% and the yield increased by almost 7%. And this, of course, Monsanto maybe could say, we put all these genes into a single genotype. But then the cost of that genotype to defend against all these mildews at the same time would be too high and the yield would be low. Sometimes you have to distribute your defenses amongst different varieties to get a good defense. And that's what's shown on the left side. You have these trade-offs within an individual plant that can be broken up if you put one ability into one variety or species and the other ability into another. Then you can avoid that. Now, if we go up a scale, then also within a field, we could have maybe a monocrop in the middle, but some side edge planting with sometimes just flowers that provide pollination services or that reduce the disease. Or for example, sometimes these are in China planted with bean and maize and so on when this is rice. And you see, when they do this, they find the farmers spray less, they spray less amount, and the grain yield is even bigger. So that was from some smaller farms around Shanghai. If we go up to the trophic interactions, then they can also be used for intensification. You see here, when we apply arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, we can increase yield by 20%. And that's again a number of studies in a meta-analysis. If you have N fixers, so that's the legume thing, you get 15%. And if you use other biofertilizers all over, the increase is maybe 15%. So that means increasing biodiversity across trophic levels. So in this case, going to a rich microbial community in the soil, you can also increase the yield. This is for below ground, but obviously also above ground. What we saw in the previous slide, if you help animals that are predators of pests, then, or if you have pollinators, then you can further increase your yield. And if it goes even further, you can even at the farm scale show that if you have different cultures within a farm, it will be more productive at the farm level and also, of course, more stable, because once a year, maybe one crop doesn't go well, the other one, another one. So this will further improve, ecologically intensify these farms. Now, why is it not already done all over? I really wonder in a way, and I'm sure in 20 years you will see it has been applied. And the reason it's not applied yet is because a lot of people still believe that monocultures are good for production and mixtures for conservation. And this is really totally wrong. Monocultures are bad for production and are very bad for conservation. And then, of course, there is also harmful regulatory frameworks which prevent biodiversity applications. For example, that you have to have varieties that are very pure and exactly defined. So that is in itself a contradiction to diversity. And then there are lots of incentives, for example, like subsidies for pesticides, all kinds of things, if you look at it worldwide, which are preventing responsible ecosystem management. And finally, this will not be necessary in the long term, but in the short term, we probably need payment schemes for introducing ecological intensification. Once it has been introduced and we have developed the technology, it will be more profitable than the conventional agriculture anyway, and then we don't need the subsidies anymore. So in summary, I think the past 30 years, they have shown that there are really huge gains to be made if we use biodiversity management in agriculture, because we know biodiversity ecosystem functioning relationships are positive. That's a paradigmatic change also in ecology, because until 30 years ago, we believed the opposite was true. There is more ecological thinking in agriculture, but still, of course, the focus on monoculture and continuing biodiversity loss. And so I predict that in next 30 years, we will use this ecological intensification with mixed variety cropping, mixed species cropping, replace chemicals by biologicals, for example, AMF fungi, other microbes in the soil. And that's maybe at the moment my most cherished approach, breeding for increased mixture yield. We have bred for 100 years or even more for monoculture yield. And now we should breed for mixture yield, and then we will have another green revolution. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. And I will be happy to hear your questions afterwards. But I guess first we will have the second talk. So I will discontinue sharing my screen and switch off my audio.
Thank you, Bernhard, so much for providing us an overview of such a complex topic. I have prepared a couple of questions for the Q&A session, but now I would like to give floor to our next speaker, Casper Zulim de Swarte, and I will share the slides to facilitate the presentation. Please let me know if you can see the slides, and hopefully shortly they will be also presented in the full screen mode.
Yes, perfect. So thank you very much, and thank you, Bernhard, for this really brilliant introduction on ecological intensification. I hope that in my talk I can answer some of the questions, like why is not everybody doing it, and how can we scale up. So I work for One Planet Business for Biodiversity, which is an association of an alliance of large, mostly very large companies who want to transform agricultural models. Basically, we work on regenerative agriculture, scaling up regenerative agriculture, and for the coming few years we'll be having a focus on Europe. If you go to the next slide, please. So just to prove that it's not just an ecological niche, these are the companies that are within OP2B, and as you can see, they are mostly very large companies that we all know and love, like Unilever, Danone, McCain, Pepsi. So large companies really investing in regenerative agriculture. They have committed to convert over 12.5 million hectares to regenerative agriculture on a global scale, and they have invested, or they will invest, 3.6 billion on confirmed investments already up until 2030. So it is a movement that is really catching on, and why is exactly why Bernhard just showed us. If you move to regenerative agriculture, which uses diverse crops, for one thing, you get a more resilient supply chain. You are more sure of what you can get, and the costs will go down. Next slide, please. So what does OP2B do? We basically do three things. We enhance supply chain resilience, and this we do by scaling up regenerative agriculture practices really from pilot farms to landscape approaches and beyond. So what we do is we look for landscape actions where several supply chains converge, and we see, can we scale this up with investments from our members? So are the different members sourcing from that region, and can we increase the investments there? The second thing that we do is help to bridge the financial gap. We're quite poor, we don't have the money ourselves, but what we can do is really see what kind of financial blended models will help farmers to scale up. And finally, and this is my job, it's also why I'm here today, is to advocate for transition opportunities, to really see how can we come up with a policy that benefits transition and that benefits farmers. And that's a policy, of course, our primary objectives for the coming year will be CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, but also included is the AKIS, so the Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System. Next slide, please. I go quite fast, so if you have any questions. Is there a definition for regenerative agriculture? Thank you. Yes, there is. So if you start with regenerative agriculture, the first thing you hear, yeah, it's vague. There is no real definition. Well, one of the problems is there are too many definitions. There are about 200 of them if you start counting them. And the European Economic and Social Committee did count them. And if you combine everything, then the largest common denominator for everybody is that regenerative agriculture is a form of agriculture that is driven by results and outcomes that can be defined, measured, verified, rather than a list of prescribed practices. Now, this must sound to music as music to your ears, because this means that we are not looking on what a farmer is doing. We are really looking on what can be scientifically measured, verified, and defined as an outcome. And I think this is the most important quality of regenerative agriculture. Next to that, of course, you can, oh, thank you. You can see that it has positive impacts both on environment, soil health, water use, reduction of pesticide risks, and carbon capture. And it maintains a positive business model for farmers. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat if there are more questions. Why are all these businesses so eager to invest money in this kind of agriculture? I mean, we've been trying to change agriculture for decades now, and very often the industry was the one lacking because there is no positive business model. Well, at this point, the cost of doing nothing, it has become greater as the cost of change. What you see, or what these large companies are seeing, is that climate change has a profound impact on their business model, on their supply chains, and this is what urges them to invest in new ways of farming. As you can see here, there is already a 6.5% crop loss annually. We can see that in really bad years, the crop loss has been over 10% in yields. We see that the economic impact is humongous, over 90 billion euros of losses in the EU alone. So that we need to have a different kind of system for agriculture. And regenerative agriculture is a very promising way to to counter these effects, to both adapt to climate change as well as mitigate the consequences. Next slide, please. I'll go very quickly through this. So what is the best way to start here is really to see what is the ecological integrity for regeneration. So what you see here is a map where you can see where the most depraved lands are, depraved soils are, and where can we invest to increase agricultural biodiversity and increase yields. Next slide, please. Because for business, this is the most the more important one. So regenerative agriculture, as said, is working on CO2 reduction, on CO2 sequestration, on water use, better water management, on reduction of pesticide risks, of increased biodiversity and soil health. But for a farmer, the bottom line is it a profitable business? Because farmers need to live. And we've done extensive research on this. Multiple studies are all showing that there is a positive business case after 3 to 5 years. And I'll come to that later. Bernhard already showed that yields go up if you have mixed cropping. Yields go up, that's one thing. On the other hand, you also see that farmers need less input. They need less pesticides, they need less fertilizer, and more importantly, they need less heavy equipment. If you do not till the land, you don't need a very heavy tractor. Heavy tractors use a lot of gas. Gas is expensive. So what you see here in these two graphs is really what is the economic business case and when do you hit the break-even point. And what you see is basically that for the first 3 to 5 years, the income of farmers will decrease. But after that, there will be up to a 20% profit to the status quo. So for farmers, it is a huge benefit to invest in this, but there is quite a large risk. And this is something that we are working on with this financial gap to see how can we bridge that. Just imagine that you're a farmer, you're a young farmer, you just bought a farm, and somebody says, well, you need to, Bernhard comes around and says, you need to change your business model because we have something that will increase your yield and it will make your farm more resilient to climate change. But for the coming 5 years, you're going to earn significantly less than you do now. Now, this gap is for a single farmer is you can't pass it. So what we are doing is really seeing how can we combine investments in such a way with public investments like CAP, with private investments and with private investments from the off-takers and private investments from banks to see if we can make a model that fits farmers so that they will not have the risks, but in a certain period they will see this profit. Then we've also calculated what the upfront investment is, and that's about 2,000 to 5,000 euros per hectare of farmland, depending a bit where you are on the innovation curve and what kind of equipment do you need. This is for crops. Next slide, please. So one of the ways to make this picture work, to make the financial picture work and to make the picture work for yields and farmers is really to have a science-based method of measuring impact. As I said at the beginning, measuring impact is really what's driving regenerative agriculture. So what we are looking for is really a science-based way of measuring, and the science-based way of measuring will influence business decision making, which is important for our members, for these large off-takers. So where can I source the best and what is it that I need to invest in the coming years? Is it in land? Is it in water management? And if you can do that, you know where to allocate your capital, you know where to invest in, and it will also reduce the risks of investors. So it is easier for new investors to get in and unlock finance. And this will ultimately lead in a new competitive, sustainable and resilient agriculture and food system. And Bernhard was saying it will take about 20 years for this transition is complete. I do agree that it will take 20 years before the transition is complete, that regenerative agriculture will be the new norm, but I sincerely hope that we can start the revolution right away and that in the coming 3 to 5 years, we see a significant turnaround in European agriculture, adapting to this new way of farming. Next slide, please. So, what do we do here as WBCSD? You can imagine that if you have a new way of farming, it is very difficult to align on what it is that you actually need to measure. So we came together with 33 global organizations representing over 1,000 large businesses, and sat down for 2 years really looking on, okay, what are the results that we need to measure to make sure that we are moving in the right direction. And this is the wheel that you see here. So you see both social results, so impact on social benefits, increased farmer income, economic benefits, and a very large array of environmental benefits. Looking at, sorry, I'll need to look at my larger screen here. Looking at greenhouse gas, at water, biodiversity, soil health, and many other things. So what we are now doing in advocacy is really seeing, can we align with governments on these outcomes? For instance, the soil monitoring law is coming up for a final vote in 2 weeks. If the soil monitoring law will measure different things than industry and farmers are doing already, then it will be a big problem and money will be lost. But if you can previously align on what it is that we need to measure on soil health, that will already increase the uptake by farmers. If you would go to the next slide. Yes, very briefly. So I'm from the WBCSD, so the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We are working with this diagram on a more theoretical way on what is it that we need to align on, what is the science telling us. Can we push governments in Europe, but also at a global scale, to adopt and work together with industry really to make a strategic alignment on this? Next to that, we work very closely together with the SCI platform. You might have heard of this. And the SCI platform is using basically the same set of indicators, but is turning this into something that you can measure on a farm. So, and it is very adaptable. You can imagine that a farm in Finland is quite different from a farm in Portugal, or a farm in Serbia is quite different. A more local farm in Serbia is quite different than a high-tech farm in the Netherlands, where I live, for instance. So we are looking on how can we, or SCI is looking how can farmers make the best use of these indicators, and we are pushing for adaptation at policy level. Next slide, please. So this is the outcomes. Of course, we need to measure that it's actually working. And what we are doing is we work at landscapes. So a first landscape is in east of England in the UK, where we are working very much on financing models. So what kind of blend can we make that farmers benefit from it the most and not our off-takers? We are working in Normandy very much on carbon finance, but also on the measuring of carbon uptake by the land. And we will start with a third one together with the Future Fit Dairy Initiative to see how can we include the regenerative agriculture principles in such a way that it's also beneficiary for dairy farmers. And this will start sometime late October. Next slide, please. I will skip this for the sake of time. Yes. And then finally, what can you do? So how can the agricultural knowledge and innovation system really support the transition in regenerative agriculture? We've been talking to farmers, we've been talking to industry, to policymakers on really what is needed to make this transition take off. The first thing that we need is support to accelerate transition on regenerative agriculture. Really have policies that have an outcome-based approach that match this new way of farming for farmers. The second thing I've talked about it quite enough now, I think, is financing and de-risking farmers. How do we help them get through this dip of 3 to 5 years? And finally, if it is outcomes that is driving this transition, how do we increase accountability and metrics on a science-based way to actually drive this transition? So here in orange you see the asks, the specific asks that we have that really concern the innovation and and research. So we need to improve access from peer-to-peer learning and training by farmers. The best way that farmers learn is learn from each other. If there is a good example, we need to make better use of it. The second thing that we ask is really to foster public-private partnerships. I mean, this is something that Horizon is doing, that EIT is doing. We need more of that to really scale up to 40% of regenerative agriculture in the next 10 years. And finally, for the accountability and metrics, we need to very much have clear and consistent metrics established by scientific standards. We need to support farmers in collecting and reporting on their data. Our companies can work with the data. They can pay for the data, but what they can't pay for is actually the infrastructure needed to collect the data. So this is something that will need a public investment. And we need to align, as said, on policy frameworks for internationally recognized standards to make sure that if that companies and governments are actually asking the same kind of information, the same kind of data from farmers for both policy purposes as well as for the supply chain. This was everything, very much in a nutshell. If you go to the last slide, you can find more on the OP2B website. If you click on this slide, the slide deck is open to be shared, and these are the reports that we have published in the last year or something on outcomes of regenerative agriculture. So really, what is the science behind water, soil health, biodiversity, and many more. Our latest report is on scaling impact through MRV, so what kind of data collection is possible. And we have some financial work done on the cost and incentives of regenerative agriculture. A report on CAP and transition, and a position paper for the vision of future of agriculture. And for the ones that can wait another week or so, then there will be a specific MRV report in the European context coming out. And then I'm very happy to take any questions from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Casper, so much. These were excellent and well-connected presentations. We have already a lot of comments in the comment section, so I will just briefly read through them so that we have also them available on the record. Is there a definition of regenerative agriculture proposed by Johannes Bender? And this is something that you have already answered throughout your presentation. Donici Alina posed the question, when say breeding for increased mixture yield, you refer to modern such as NGT or conventional breeding, to which Bernhard responded, all means of breeding should be considered. And the last question that is waiting for an answer is by Yves van der Sterre. Is the presented method or framework to measure RA selection of indicators and core metric an agreed and validated one? I believe, Casper, this is the question for you.
Yeah, but if I start with the last one, it's a very easy to answer. It's yes. We work together with SBTI and many other of standard setting organizations to make sure that it is scientifically sound.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have taken some notes during your presentations because one of the pillars of this webinars is biodiversity preservation. So, Casper, you have reflected on both the fact that we need to preserve biodiversity on farm as much as we need to preserve the biodiversity which is beyond farms. So we are aware of the fact that human activities such as farming are also influencing biodiversity, not just locally, like in terms of farming. So I wanted to go back to Bernhard so that you both can answer this question, both from the policy and from the scientific and genetic perspective. Which are the strategies so far the most successful from like an outcome point of view? Is it like going back to old breeds to breed them locally, or should we strive for mixing breeds and genetic improvements to basically direct the evolution of the species to be more adapted and agile when it comes to climate change and the new requirements when it comes to intensive crop production? So these perspectives are I believe, equally present today, but I was curious, what's your opinion when it comes to this particular strategy?
Okay, Marina, I think you've asked two questions. The first one is, should they put land aside to protect biodiversity? And I think, and that's what Casper said, and I think that's really extremely important. There was a study by Adjunct and some others in, I think, Trends in Plant Ecology and Evolution or something like that. And they found that the European Union has a huge problem because they don't require people who do organic farming to set land aside. So actually the effect is sometimes even counterintuitively negative. For example, in Switzerland, everybody who wants to certify as a biological or organic agriculture must set some land aside for biodiversity protection. So I think that's really a good thing, but you need enough, because once in a European study we found that in the Netherlands, sorry Casper to say that, the ecological compensation areas were too far from each other. So they didn't have exchange anymore, they didn't work. But in Switzerland they are quite close, and then they work quite well, you know, because animals and plant populations can move. So I think setting aside land is very important. And when we voted about biodiversity initiative in Switzerland a few months ago, you know, the farmers said, we don't want to give land away. But actually, if you give a little bit of land away, you might have a benefit that's bigger than the land you gave up, because maybe on the remaining land, you will be even better off. And then the other question, you know, when we breed, of course, all the breeding, even if it's molecular breeding and new tools, can only be done with the genetic resources that we have already, that nature produced for us. You know, it would be far from realistic to create varieties ourselves by mutagenesis and then find the best one. So we would rather make sure, if we are new breeder that use molecular tools, to have as many old varieties as possible. You know, to put the gene in for drought resistance from the south and put a gene for disease resistance from that part, and then combine it in a clever way. So I think in both cases, we really need the diversity as the basis for a productive, even a productive agriculture, and of course, especially for a sustainable agriculture. Because I didn't mention this so strongly, but as Casper showed, if you use this regenerative agriculture, you can really reduce pesticide use, fertilizer input, and so on.
Perfect. Thank you. Based on what Bernhard just responded, Casper, do you believe that there are policies which are hindering maximization of genetic varieties? Because as Bernhard mentioned, we do have policies which are preventing us from using the genetically modified organisms throughout Europe.
Yeah, well, that is one thing, but that's not the core of the problem. Are there specific policies that are hindering diversification? I don't think so, not intentionally. But you see that in the implementation, it can be very difficult for a farmer to work like this because of all kinds of stupid either policy rules or simple administrative errors. I've heard from a farmer just a few days ago. He was telling me that he was doing strip farming. So that means that you have different kinds of crops next to each other. And when he wanted to apply for his CAP funding, he couldn't, because the CAP funding just says, okay, how many hectares of wheat do you have? and he can't say that he has different kind of crops because the system doesn't work like that. So what we need to really do is rethink the way that we make agricultural policy. So what is needed to make this transition happen? Because it is very clear that this transition needs to happen. We need a new way of farming if we want to have any kind of agriculture in Europe for the coming next 100 years. So yes, we need to rethink policy.
Thank you, Casper, so much. We have also a question from my colleague, Valentina. Can you elaborate more on the financing method for farmers that blend in public and private capital? Is there a risk of greenwashing under the biodiversity cause from private investors?
This is 3 lectures in one question, I think. I'll try to be brief, and I'll try to do it from a farmer's perspective. If you make this transition, you will need to invest. You will need to invest in land. You'll need to invest in new equipment, capex, so large capital investments. This is often done by banks and private investors. So this is one thing that needs to work. If you're going to make this transition, that means that you need to have an offtake agreement. If you we have quite a bit of beer companies around in our consortium. If you breed barley for beer, you need to make sure that if you go through this transition, you have a steady form of income. So that means that you need to work with a beer company to have a long-term contract, but also to have temporarily at least an increased income to deal with the yield loss. You need to invest in knowledge and innovation, because you need to the technology part needs to be there, but also how do we measure data? What is it that I actually need to do? That costs time, and as we all know, time is money. And we have new ecosystem services that are being provided, giving additional business models for farmers. Now, all of these different financial streams come from different kinds of funders, private, public, or a mix, and everything needs to come together at the same farm, at the same time, and at the right place. Now, farmers do one thing very good, and that's farming. Most of them are not financial wizards, because otherwise they would have become bankers and not farmers. So what we need is sort of a one-stop shop to help farmers bring all those different kinds of blended finance together and make this transition happen for him. And then from a farmer's perspective, there is this one tiny issue, and that is pre-existing debt. Most farmers have a lot of debt, up to $1 million or something like that. Farmers are saying it themselves, you can't do green if you are in red, so we need to deal with this pre-existing debt as well. That nobody knows how to do at this moment. So that's the stack for farmers. Is there a risk of greenwashing under the biodiversity cause? Yes, there are many ways of greenwashing, so there is always a risk. Why we are focusing so much on accountability and transparency is to make sure that that investors can actually see what farmers are doing and can see what the supply chain is doing, to be completely open about it, and then we can expose greenwashing more easily.
Thank you, Casper, so much. I would like to invite the audience to also pose questions. We have a comment from our coordinator, Orlani Kornakor. Really excellent and insightful presentations. Do we need more modeling and also communication around short and long-term risks? For instance, investing in more sustainable practices may cost more in the short term, but deliver benefits and boost resilience in the long term. Also, are there nice examples from around the world where these practices are demonstrated over a long period at scale? I believe
Bernhard, you go first.
I think there have been some European programs where they tried several of these methods, and they also had farms that could be used as these examples where the practices can be demonstrated. And they did demonstrate it within their networks, but I guess that still exists. And for example, there was one program called Diversify, and another one. Yeah, it was a whole group of European European funded projects. I think maybe for the long term, what do you mean by long term? If it's like up to 10 years, there is certainly examples. Maybe for very long term, there are not so many examples, except of course historical cases. What we also know for some cases is that if you use conventional farming, it could take forever to get back to a healthy soil, for example. So our colleague Marcel van der Heijden is specialized on the soil mycorrhiza and microbial communities. He found that some pesticides would have effects that last for 40 years after conversion to organic agriculture. But that's kind of the other side.
Of course, more research is always necessary. So that is the easy question. I just posted in the chat the link to our website where you can see a lot of stories from industry and farmers from all over the world who are doing this on what is needed. So I hope that will give you some inspiration. I think really what is necessary to make this transition happen are a few things. First of all, like I said, it's the policy that needs to change. We also need to have a cap that is actually repurposing subsidies for transition rather than for the status quo. That is very important for farmers. I think on the science part, we need to align on what is actually working. Every project, I'm in many steering committees and advisory groups for regenerative agriculture. Everybody is trying to look for new ways of measuring the impact. Scientists are great in measuring impact in many different ways. We need one way that everybody agrees on. That is what is working. I always try to compare it with 25 years ago when we had a problem with food safety in Europe. We couldn't guarantee food safety basically. And from the scientific community, there were new ways of improving food safety every other month. There were new ways of measuring. But until somebody said, no, this is the way that we're going to do it. We're going to use HACCP, we're going to use global gap. And that was what made the turnover. And I think this is something that we will need for a new sustainable regenerative agriculture as well. Yes, we need to have the science to underpin it, but somebody would need to say, this is the way that we go forward. And now SCI is very close on being that organization, at least on the farming part with business, on how do we measure the impact at the practical side. And I hope that the policymakers will follow soon.
Thank you so much for your answers. Just in case, I want to check once more if there are any questions from the audience. Of course, you're feel free to also pose your questions in person. Until then, I would like to thank both of our speakers today for sharing these important insights on biodiversity strategy when it comes to intensive agricultural production, how we need to be mindful on the perspective from the farmers, both in terms of their awareness on the benefits of using regenerative agriculture as a strategy for successful and high yield production. But also, I would like to also quote Casper here. We also need to be mindful on the situation where these farmers are currently working on, and that is you cannot go green if you are in red. So once again, thank you. Hopefully, we will be seeing each other in the upcoming webinars. So please stay tuned, follow RefreSCAR on social media, and pay attention to our website where we regularly post news and events such as this Spotlight on webinar. and wish you all the best. Looking forward to our transition to regenerative agriculture in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.